Our key question this lesson is, why was there stalemate for 4 years? A stalemate is where no one is winning, but no one is losing either. It's like a draw in a game of football, but rather than going to penalties, the game just goes on and on and on. World War I lasted for 4 years because the two sides were so evenly matched that neither team could defeat the other. We'll look at what changed that next lesson. Before we read the overview, watch the YouTube video first. That will help you understand some of the key words in the overview box. Now we've watched the YouTube videos, it should help us understand the key words. Let's read the overview now. The Germans planned to crash through Belgium into France and defeat the French before Britain had a chance to cross the Channel. This plan was devised by Alfred Graf von Schlieffen. It became known as the Schlieffen Plan. The Belgian army fought hard to hold up the German army, allowing the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, to arrive and join the fighting. The Germans decided to make a dash for Paris, thinking the French might give up if their capital was taken, but the French rushed out reserve troops in buses and taxis to stop the Germans at the Battle of the Marne. Germany then decided to capture northern Channel ports to prevent the British army from escaping, but this plan also failed. Both sides tried unsuccessfully to break through each other's defences, but were unsuccessful. Both sides dug trenches to defend themselves from machine gun fire and heavy artillery shells. Neither side was able to advance. Neither side was prepared to give up. There was a deadlock. There was stalemate on the Western Front. Despite technology improving throughout the war, the tactics used were often repeats of previously unsuccessful attacks. Most battles ended with no winner, usually because of the weather. Waterlogged trenches and no man's land that was a total quagmire meant men, horses and tanks would sink in the mud. This continued until 1918, when some changes. The USA entered. The blockade meant that Germany lacked supplies. The spring offensive meant that the stalemate was finally broken. We've got two sources to look at this lesson. The one on the left is a photograph, and the one on the right is a drawing. Now, because they're both sources, they were both from the time of the war. But what might the differences be between a photograph, taken by a person behind a camera, and a drawing be? What can you see in the two images? Are there any similarities? What are the differences? What can you definitely learn about trenches from these images? What do these images imply? Do you think that one is a better source than the other? Why might this be? We've also got two imagination tasks this week. The first is asking us about the Schlieffen Plan. What was that again? You might want to watch the video from the start to remind yourself if you can't remember. You're being asked to write an article for a German newspaper. Remember, this is from a German perspective and it's for a newspaper. You need your article to be both supporting Germany but also persuading and encouraging the German people to think it's a good idea, that the Schlieffen Plan can win the war for Germany. Hopefully you've watched the second video too now. I'd like you to pretend you're in France or Belgium. Write home to your family in Britain. Tell them what life is like for you in the trenches. But remember, if you're too honest about what conditions are like, the government might censor your letter to stop your family from getting downhearted about the war. But also, in case the enemy get a hold of your letter, you don't want to give away any military secrets. As always, it's important to ask questions about the past. What questions do you have about what we've learnt this lesson?
In this lesson, we are going to be looking at why did Germany surrender and lose World War I. We've put a link there for you to watch a documentary about the end of the war. You can watch it before we continue or after. It's a really great way of explaining and showing the events of the final years. In April 1917, the US declared war on Germany. American troops went into action just over a year later alongside the Triple Entente. which is Britain, France and Russia. Germany and its allies knew they had to launch a big offensive, a big attack, if they were to win the war before too many US troops arrived, as they were a very powerful nation. Not only that, but the American soldiers were not tired from years of fighting like everyone else was. They would also have plenty of money and supplies to help their allies continue in the war. The German soldiers attempted to push Britain and its allies back with a series of offences or attacks. General Ludendorff launched a major offence in the spring using stormtroopers, specially trained soldiers. Despite getting very close to Paris, many soldiers started looting, taking food and drink, etc., in enemy trenches due to food shortages. They also realized that they had been lied to about supplies, so some mutinied. They went against their leaders. So just imagine that for a minute. You are a German soldier and you've been told, I know you haven't got much food, but neither do the British. Let's keep on fighting because we're both close to starvation. And then you find in their trenches that in fact they've got plenty of supplies thanks to America. You realize that you have been on the losing side and you've been lied to by your commanders, which is why they looted and they mutinied. On the 8th of August 1918, the French and British armies launched the 100-day offensive, which was a counter-attack going back against them, which pushed the Germans back. By the autumn of 1918, Germany and its allies realized it was no longer possible to win the war. Those fighting alongside Germany, for example Austria and Hungary, started to withdraw from the war, and by the start of November, Germany was fighting alone. They could not win. The leaders of the German army told the German government to end the fighting. The government asked for an armistice, an agreement to stop the fighting, and Germany's leader Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated. He left his position as Kaiser, the throne on 9th of November 1918. 2 days later, Germany signed the armistice and the guns fell silent. The fighting stopped at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month. When we look at sources, you have to picture or imagine what the artist or creator was thinking as they created this source. What was in their mind? What were their beliefs? What did they want people to know or think? What was the point of it? So on the left, we have the French commander, General Foch, and on the right, we've got Germany with the stereotypical infamous helmet. And there we have the terms for German people, that they must pay all damage to civilians on land and sea and air. And look at how it's presented. Look at how the terms on the paper are presented. Look at how the man on the left, General Foch, French, is stood compared to how the man on the right, representing Germany, is stood. What does this source suggest and inform to us about the end of World War I? You can see just below this source the provenance, that is, the information telling you where and when it's from. So it's a German cartoon published in 1919. The German mother is saying to her starving child, when we have paid 100 billion marks, then I can give you something to eat. It's really obvious that these German people are suffering because of the Treaty of Versailles. What do you think this source is informing and suggesting about life for some in Germany following World War I? Don't just go for the obvious that you can see straight away. Think about, why did this cartoonist picture or create something to do with a mother and child? Why did they want this to be seen by many people? And so the final part of this lesson. Do you have any questions from what we have looked at? Have you thought why or who or when or where throughout this lesson? If so, what questions would you have for the people of this time period? Those questions could be directed to the Allies, the German people, soldiers, politicians, civilians. So whether your question is to the French, the British, the Americans, the Germans, specifically German soldiers, politicians, civilians, what would they be and why? In this lesson, we will be trying to answer the question, how and why did Hitler and the Nazis rise to power? Let's read through the overview together. After Germany was defeated in World War I, it became a democratic republic. That means that for the first time, Germans were able to vote for whoever is in power, rather than be led by their Kaiser or Emperor. The traditional strong leader is what most Germans at this point really liked, and this new form of democracy was not well received. Its new leader had difficult times as they were blamed for signing the hated Treaty of Versailles. That's the treaty that ended officially World War I and brought Germany into a stage of repairing and apologizing for the atrocities that occurred. So that included land being stripped away from them, money being paid back. It included a lot of unemployment. Because of this, we've got loads of soldiers at this point in Germany unemployed, loads of industrial workers unemployed, and many people were very poor and hungry. And so the communists tried to seize power with fighting in the streets. Communists and communism is a rather new way of running a country at this point in time. Russia was successfully taken over by the communists, and so a lot of European countries have kind of seen what Russia has done and trying to emulate it. The situation got much worse in 1923 because there was hyperinflation. As you can see from those two sources there, hyperinflation is when there's a lot of money being printed out, which actually makes the money worthless, which is why at times it was cheaper to burn money than to buy firewood to burn. In November 1923, for example, you would need 200 billion German Reichsmarks to buy a loaf of bread. Hitler helped to form the new Nazi Party. He tried to seize power in 1923 but was arrested and imprisoned. It was while he was in prison he wrote his famous book Mein Kampf, which includes his racial policy, his beliefs in what it means to be a pure Aryan German, about land grabbing around Eastern Europe, for example. It includes how you should run a country, and also a few fabricated anecdotes or stories from his childhood. The Nazi Party, to start with, did not do very well in elections, as things in Germany were slowly getting better. Things were starting to get better because there were loans and reliance on America. But in 1929, the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression that started in the USA affected millions of people over the world, including Germany. And so Hitler and the Nazi Party were able to use these events to make speeches blaming the weak government, blaming Jews for the end of World War I and for anything financial, and communists, etc. Everyone apart from them were the problems, and they, the Nazis, were the solutions. The party used violence and intimidation to help enforce the party's views. As the economic problems, anything to do with money, or finance, we refer to economic. So as the economic problems got worse, the Nazi Party increased in its votes in each election until 1932, when the Nazi Party won the highest number of seats in the Reichstag, which is the name of their parliament. They promised to re-establish law and order, reduce unemployment numbers, and regain German nationalism, pride in their own country. However, this also meant reducing freedom and rights. Here we have three photographic sources. The first two show the impact of hyperinflation. You can see on the left we have children stacking up big wads of German notes. What do these two photographs inform and suggest about life in Germany around 1929? As we've just read, that's around the time that the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression was happening. The second photo source I want to look at, down at the bottom there, is a group of people, a group of men specifically, listening, crowded around Hitler. You can see Hitler at the bottom right-hand side. What does this paint, or what image does this create of Hitler and how people thought or believed about him? What does this image of Hitler inform and suggest to you? Imagine you are a secret spy for British intelligence. You have been sent to Germany on 3 separate occasions to write a detailed report on the morale, how people are feeling, of the German people. Write these reports under the following dates. So we've got 1923. What is happening in 1923 in Germany? How is that affecting the morale of the people? 1929 and then 1932. 3 key dates which helps explain how the Nazis and Hitler specifically as their leader were able to rise up. It's very easy for us to judge the people who voted Hitler and the Nazi Party into power. But imagine you were there at that point, after the devastating World War I and the economic issues. They didn't have hindsight like we do. They were given promises, and you need to remember that for the next task. What questions would you have for, firstly, a Nazi Party member around this time period? Someone unemployed who votes for Hitler in 1932, and a German Jew in 1932. Remember, these people do not know what is going to happen once Hitler is in power. They do not know about the World War II or the Holocaust. They do not know these things. So what would you ask them around the dates that we've been looking at? There are so many ways that you can go and find out more about Hitler and the Nazis' rise to power. One really good way is to watch the film Hitler, the Rise of Evil. It's on YouTube and the link is here. It shows everything from his childhood through to fighting in World War I and his reaction to the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. It shows you what the politics were like at that time, what people's lives were at that time, and it shows you how he, through one event and another, eventually rose up to being someone of great influence.